If you're like me, then over the course of your life, you have had people that you looked up to. Mentors, parents, grandparents, drill sergeants, someone that impressed you, and you thought to yourself, now that's the kind of person I want to be when I grow up, you know? And we have them all over. We have mentors, people that we look up to at church or at work or in our families. And I think that God blesses each and every one of us with special people that we cherish in our hearts. Not just the memory of them, but the lessons that we've learned from them. And I have many of those examples, but to give you a couple. My Grandpa Palmer. I loved my grandpa as only, you know, a boy can. Boys need grandpas, you know. He was my dad's dad, you know, and that felt pretty cool, you know, to have someone who loved me that used to be in charge of my dad. I don't know, there was something about that I was like, you know, I'm friends with Grandpa kind of a thing. And Grandpa would take us camping. Grandpa would come over, and my grandpa was the kind of grandpa who never wasted an opportunity to teach lessons. And I remember as a small kid, all of, you know, this large family. We were living up in Alaska, and Grandpa had this crazy scheme on paper of different lessons that needed to be learned, and at the end of the day, he would rate how well you did on these various lessons, and he would pay you in M&Ms. And for some reason, that was very, very, you know, inspiring, moving for a kid to get 5 M&Ms as opposed to 3, and to, you know, want desperately to impress Grandpa. And it didn't matter if it was homework or doing chores or how you treated your siblings or whatever it was. Grandpa impressed upon you that he was always watching, and he had his cachet of M&Ms, and he was ready to either, you know, dole them out or withhold them, as painful as it might be. Because Grandpa, one evening we were all gathered up, and he's awarding the M&Ms, and each of us are sitting there just waiting for our turn. And he had a small pile of M&Ms for all of the good things that I had done. And he said, "Now you're losing all of your M&Ms except for one, because I saw you spit on your sister." And I was heartbroken. I'd lost all of my M&Ms because Grandpa had caught me spitting on my sister. And I'll never forget my drill sergeant Palm. He was just this little short, cut-off guy in Smokey the Bear hat. He was probably half my size, and clearly that irritated him greatly. And Drill Sergeant Palm, and he pulled me into his back office one day. He was really, really hard on me. And he said, "I want to tell you something, Palmer. I don't know what it is, but there's something about you that most people don't have. Call it a command presence, call it whatever you will, but you're a natural leader. And I don't intend to let you get away with anything." And so our platoon would do something. He did not put me in any position of authority with which to express my leadership. But he would never punish the platoon guide or anyone else. If our platoon was doing something that it shouldn't be doing, he would come in there and he would just hammer me. And it was so pleasurable for him. He would walk through the courtyard. We'd all be standing at attention. And even if we were doing the right thing, he would walk by. He wouldn't look at anybody. He'd have his clipboard out. He'd walk by and he'd just yell, "Palmer, push!" as he went by. And I'd have to get down and start doing push-ups. And there was something about my drill sergeant that I thought, that guy has something that I want. You know, a mentor. Somebody who I'll never forget my drill sergeant. I'll never forget my grandpa. You can't, right? It's impossible to forget them. And when I had first taken charge of a platoon and we were gearing up, we were getting ready to go fight in Iraq. We were going through something called firing tables. It's where they judge field artillerymen on whether or not they know their craft, and you go through more and more complex firing tables, and they expect to see more and more from you. And I'll just be very honest with you, I was a terrible field artilleryman. There's so much to know. And it's a very, very precise craft, and if you don't do it exactly right, the wrong people, and lots of them, die on the battlefield. And I had a sergeant first class, and in the field artillery we call them smoke instead of sergeant when they're in charge of a platoon. Smoke Drummond. And Smoke Drummond had just gotten off of 3 years on the trail doing drill instructor work, drill sergeant work, and he had come to our platoon, and there was something about Smoke Drummond that was inspiring. He had a way of chewing out people without ever using profanity and without ever raising his voice. That was inspiring. And I, of course, I outranked him by rank because I was the lieutenant, I was the officer, he was the sergeant who was in charge of everything. And I remember telling him on the first time where we sat down and I give him the grade papers that I'm going to be filling out on whether or not he gets promoted. And so you list out, these are my expectations for you, that sort of stuff. And so I listed the normal expectations. Hey, you know, we're headed to war. I expect that you'll train everybody in this platoon, that will be ready to shoot artillery or to do all these other sort of things. And then I listed on the bottom, I said, Smoke Drummond, I care very, very deeply that you train me. I will be grading you on how well I learned field artillery. And so I expect that you will be able to be professional and allow me to be the officer and all that kind of thing, but you are going to train me. And I just have story after story after story of me and Smoke Drummond in the field, and I was just learning from him. He knew how to pull into a firing point and inside of 5 minutes have everything perfect. I mean, perfect. And he just knew how to do it, how to do all of it. You can't forget that kind of stuff. You can't forget those kind of people. You can't forget the people that are sort of the giant monuments in your life that you look up to and you say to yourself, you know, I wish I could be like that person. I want to learn from that person. I care about that person. And somehow, even though our mentors are so important to us, and you can't forget, you'll never forget them. You'll never forget what they've done for you. You'll never forget the stories. You'll never forget the way that you felt as you were learning, as you were in awe of them, as you were picking up the trade, the craft, the whatever it is. But somehow, the people of God can forget God. Somehow, though we can't forget the people that we look up to, we can instantaneously forget our history with God. Even though it's much deeper. Even though it's much better. Even though God is much more of what we are trying to become. He's much better at teaching us. He's much better at loving us. He's there in every single moment. My grandpa was there for me a lot. There was a lot of times he wasn't there for me. He had a different life in a different city and but the Lord was there for me every single moment. I remember when I almost got fired from my job at Hollywood Video. And it was devastating to me. And I was driving home, and I just remember just crying and crying on my way home because I had almost gotten fired, and I knew that I deserved it and all this sort of stuff. And my grandpa wasn't there. My drill sergeant wasn't there. But the Lord was there in a way that's really hard for me to describe. In a way, in a presence that's so real And as silly as it is, it was real to me. I was 15 or whatever, and 16, and I had just been through this crucible at Hollywood Video, and only God was there for me. And up to this point in time, I've never told that story to anyone ever, but God was there sitting right next to me in the car, and I remember feeling Him. It's so easy to forget Him. Moses knew this. And as he is delivering his second sermon, he's going to give us some amazing advice on how we can hold on to the relationship with God in the way that we ought to. Let's begin in Deuteronomy chapter 8. The whole commandment that I command you today, you shall be careful to do, that you may live and multiply, and go in and possess the land that the Lord swore to give to your fathers, and you shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that He might humble you. We have to remember the whole way. The whole way. If you want to remember God, you want to hold on to all of those memories. You have to remember from the very beginning. And you have to remember all of the times that God has been with you, that God has been coaching you, that God has been disciplining you, that God has been cheering you on, encouraging you. The whole way. You shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that He might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep His commandments or not. Moses says this whole way that you're supposed to remember, it has a purpose. You weren't just stumbling along and God was sort of giving you advice as you stumbled along. No, the whole way was for the purpose of humbling you. Now, I say this often, but I say it so that people will know it. It's important to know. Humble sounds very spiritual. It sounds like something you want. But in the biblical language, there is no difference between the word to be humbled and to be humiliated. They are both the same thing. But humble sounds so much better. So what is the Bible here saying? I was walking with you, remember the whole way so that you will be humiliated? Yes, in the sense that when we are with God, we are very small. And we have a way of forgetting that. And we think that we're larger than we were in the story. Because in the story, we're always about 5 years old. And God is just this thick brick dude who has everything in control. He's your father. He loves you. He's going to take care of you. But somehow when we think about the stories and we look back, somehow we weren't that helpless. We weren't that helpless. We weren't that needy. Yeah, God did help out a little bit here and there. He gave me some good advice, but I'm the one who took it. I'm the one who put it into effect, and that's not how it was. That's why you have to remember the whole way, and the whole way is designed to get you to humble yourself, to know who you are in God's presence, and to test you, to humble you and to test you. God has brought you up to this point in your life. Every trial, every joy, every provision, every lack has been to see whether or not you will stay with Him and keep His word, keep His ways. Verse 3, and He humbled you and let you hunger and fed you with manna. He humbled you and let you hunger. God let them get hungry. Somehow we feel like when we're not getting what we need, God isn't doing His job. But you shouldn't remember it that way. Because all those hungry times, God led them into a place where there was no food. None. And He did it for a reason, so that they would get hungry. And they would go, we're in a place where there's no food. What's going on here? All of a sudden, How needy are they? Very needy. How capable are they to cause, I don't know, rocks to turn into bread? They can't do it. And they failed this test, by the way. They failed it over and over again. So what did God do? In their hunger, He provided in a way that they could not have imagined. See, they were praying for things like, bring us lots of meat, bring us a food source. And God caused something to happen that had never happened before in the history of man. Bread appeared on the ground like the morning dew. All right, go out and get it. He caused them to hunger. You have to remember the story. Your great need was never God's lack. It was always to put you into a place where you needed Him. And then think about all of those ways in your life that God has provided in a way you could have never even dreamed of. The crossing of the Red Sea kind of thing. The manna on the ground kind of thing. The water out of the flinty rock kind of thing. And He humbled you and let you hunger and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that He might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. You see, it turns out that God knows our frame. God knows who you are. He knows your needs. And we have this disastrous propensity to think that our physical needs are all that there are. That's why God lets us hunger. That's why God lets us thirst. That's why God lets us get sick and need Him. Because it turns out, actually, bread is not all we need. Water is not all we need. What do we need more than anything in the world? We need Him to speak to us. That's what we need more than anything in the world. Man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word or everything that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Verse 4, your clothing did not wear out on you, and your foot did not swell these 40 years. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, the Lord your God disciplines you. Moses is pointing to a truth here. As hungry as you think you were, because sometimes we can look back and we can go like, man, I went without. Man, there were some dark days. Yes, but you're also not counting all of the things that you didn't even think about, because your clothes never wore out. Your feet never got swollen. You were still able to go along with God despite your hunger, despite your thirst, despite all of the things that you needed. What you really needed was the presence of God, the speaking of God. And God provided for you more than you would like to admit. Because up until this point in the story, one of the miracles is not, we traveled for 40 years and our feet never swelled. Glory to God. It was something that didn't happen. Do you get what I'm saying? So God doesn't just provide in the things that you can see. There are things that you haven't even thought about, because your feet haven't been swollen, right? Your clothes didn't wear out. They weren't going, God, I need new clothes. Where am I going to get? No, he provided that. They didn't even have to think about it. But Moses is reminding them, sometimes there's things that you don't even think about. God was there in providing that. Well, think about it. You got to remember the whole way. And the problem is that sometimes we don't know what the whole way was. Our view is so myopic. Our understanding of our story is so small that we don't even know our whole story. Only God can show it to us. And as a father disciplines his son, so the Lord your God disciplines you. Now, I actually have just spent so much time thinking about this one line. Probably because I have a son. I've got two of them. I also have a father. And there is something very special about the way that a father disciplines his son. There's something very special about it. Because a father wants his son to learn from all of his mistakes without making them himself. A father wants a son to succeed in a way that perhaps the father never did. A father hopes for the son in the way that a son can't even know. They don't have enough experience. So I was just reminded of Saturday mornings at the Palmer household, and some of you were around when we were growing up. It wasn't just limited to Palmer kids. It was neighbors, friends, anyone who was staying over. Saturday morning was a morning for work. So if you had friends who stayed over on a Friday night, chances were they'd be weeding the garden with you on Saturday morning. And I remember my dad. And I didn't think of it as discipline then, but it sure was. Every Saturday morning we're going to get up and do chores. How does a father discipline his son? First and foremost, it's by example. First and foremost, a father disciplines his son by example. I cannot remember a time when my dad was sitting on the couch and said, "Everybody get out into the garden and weed the garden. Come tell me when you're done." He was always out there. "No, don't pick that plant. That's the corn. Leave the corn alone. Pick the ones that look like this. Those are weeds." "No, head down, butt up, keep working, quit talking. Thomas, quit throwing dirt balls." A father disciplines his son by example. A father is one of those mentor figures who doesn't just tell you what to do, shows you what to do. And there are many preachers today who cannot talk about God as a father, like your father. Actually, we live in a time, probably the greatest institution that has fallen apart in our society is fatherhood. And so preachers have to give examples from books or from movies or something like that because so many people grew up without real fathers. But God's not like that. God is a loving father who disciplines you as a father disciplines his son, which is first and foremost by example. He never leaves you, never sends you to the work without being there himself, never tells you to do something that he's not doing. Jesus was able to say, "If you've seen me, you've seen the Father." Nobody gets to see the Father except whom the Son shows. That's how united the Father and the Son were. Because a father disciplines his son by example. A father disciplines his son according to what will work. A father doesn't enforce some kind of discipline that's not going to work. The father knows the son. And just like I know my son, I know what will work and what won't work for him. Sometimes I have discovered that by doing it wrong, and God doesn't have that problem. He knows us so intimately that God can only do the things to you, the discipline to you, that will work for you. A father disciplines his son for the son's benefit. There's a father who shouldn't discipline out of, you're going to make me look bad, or what if I. It's all about, no, I'm going to cause you to learn in a way that's going to be good for you. Because those Saturday mornings, doing chores, weeding the garden, picking up all the dog poop in the yard, doing all of those sort of things were about learning work ethic. And one of my brothers who long ago left the family and for a life of crime and living not with the Lord, I saw him some years ago, and he said, I'm still a Palmer. I said, yeah, I know that. He said, I know how to work. Of all the things that make you a Palmer, I know how to work. I can outwork everybody else in the crew. I can outwork them. Because he was talking about Saturday mornings. God always disciplines us for our benefit. He never punishes us for things we are incapable of changing. And I actually remind people of this in my counseling, when I'm doing one-on-one counseling, when someone is going through, a lot of times what happens is later on in life, someone begins to remember traumatic sexual things from their childhood, and they say, why? I was doing fine up till now. And I have to remind them, God never brings up something for you to walk through that he doesn't believe you can walk through. That's probably why he didn't do it 5 years ago. Probably why he didn't do it 10 years ago. So if you are beginning to remember this stuff, it is because God knows that you can be healed from it. God does not discipline us when we are incapable of change. He is so gentle. And lastly, God the Father, when he disciplines his sons, he always disciplines in love, in tenderness, and in hope. And when my son has done something very naughty and he needs to be corrected, and the correction happens and he's crying, I always say, JD, everybody messes up. Everybody. You, me, your mom, your Paka and Beppa, everybody messes up. And it is only a loving parent who will correct you so that you can learn, so that you can do better next time. We're going to do better next time, aren't we? Well, give me a hug, you know? It's in love and it's in tenderness. It's never designed to cause you embarrassment. In every interaction that I have had with the Lord, that he has disciplined me, he has always maintained my dignity. He's never taken that from me. Even when I didn't deserve it. Even when you didn't deserve it. God does not strip our humanity away from us. He never casts us out as his children when we are responding to his discipline, because as a father disciplines his son, so the Lord your God disciplines you. You've got to remember that. You've got to remember the whole story of your life, where God has disciplined you, and you have to say to yourself, yeah, that's true. That's God's character. We have to remember that. So, you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God. This is verse 6. So you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God by walking in his ways and by fearing him. This is interesting because Moses is telling the people how to fulfill the law. He's not saying, if you fear God, if you walk in his ways, then you'll keep the commandments. He says it the other way around. He says, do you want to keep the commandments? Then walk in God's ways. Then fear him. That is because the commandments of God are not a list of rules to show you how bad you are and that you'll never make it. It's to tell you this is how you will act when you're in proper relationship with God. These are the ways in which you will walk. And so if you have trouble keeping God's law, if you have trouble doing the right thing, the answer is not to double down on your self-discipline and to try harder, but rather to fear the Lord, to search for him, to walk in his ways. Verse 7, for the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land. Now for the rest of the paragraph here, Moses is painting a picture of the future for the people if they will walk in God's ways and fear him. This is where you're headed. Okay? This is fear the Lord, have this proper, remember the whole story up till now, because there's more story coming. And I want to tell you about it. The Lord your God is bringing you into a good land. A land of brooks of water, of fountains and springs, flowing out in the valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey. A land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing. A land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you can dig copper. And you shall eat and be full, and you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. We have a future. It's a good future if we will but walk in the ways of God. Now, Moses knows. Moses knows. It's so hard to forget our human mentors, those giants that we idolized and walked behind and wanted to be like, but it's so easy to forget God. It's so easy to forget the story. It's so easy to pretend that the crisis we are in right now is the only crisis we've ever been in, and God has never done anything up to this point, and I wonder if he's going to do what I want. So he says in verse 11, take care, lest you forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his rules and his statutes, which I command you today. Lest when you have eaten and are full, and have built good houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks multiply, and your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied. You get that? Material blessing. And you're going to be in a good land. You're doing all the things right. You're living according to the ways of God. He's going to see fit to bless you. You're going to have a lot of stuff. And when your stuff is multiplied, verse 14, then your heart be lifted up. God was with them all those 40 years in order to humble them, to test them, to show them, look, I'm God, you're not. You're this big, I'm this big. Let's not forget that. I'm doing everything for you. Don't forget that. I'm the one who's leading you. I'm guiding you. I'm teaching you. I'm providing for you. I do everything. You just follow along and be faithful. But you're going to have a lot of stuff, and then your heart is going to go right up. Verse 14, then your heart be lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, who led you through the great and terrifying wilderness, with its fiery its fiery serpents and scorpions, and thirsty ground where there was no water, who brought you water out of the flinty rock, who led you in the wilderness with manna that your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and test you to do good in the end. Beware lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the power to get wealth, that he may confirm his covenant that he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. And if you forget the Lord your God, and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I solemnly warn you today that you shall surely perish, like the nations that the Lord makes to perish before you. So shall you perish, because you would not obey the voice of the Lord your God. See, man doesn't live by bread alone. And the Lord knows that the only way we can learn it is to be really hungry. To be really hungry. And to cry out to him. And then he provides in crazy, miraculous ways that I didn't know, but my dad didn't know about. Nobody even heard about it before. Yet God still provided. Now we have that connection. We have that memory. We have that lesson that we've learned from the very hand of God. But then we get stuff. And stuff causes us to forget and to think that we are bigger than we are. If material blessing causes us to forget who the Lord is, then we are living in a nation and a time of anesthesia. We live in a culture that is pumping us full of forgetfulness. But don't forget, what's the antidote when you have a lot of stuff? you're not in the place where you're really hungry, you say, God gave this to me. Thank God. He gave me the power to do this. Don't say, I did this. I accomplished this. It was my strength that did it. It was my mind that did it. No, remember the whole story. Remember the whole thing, that awful wilderness that God brought you through. Remember those fiery serpents? All the scorpions? No water? Remember that? And yet God, He brought you through it and did good to you in the end. Remember that. Moses is saying that remembering this, recounting the whole story, it's literally life and death. I wonder, what would we, you, me, what would we look like if we were people who really had this down? We were people who really understood. We were people who remembered the whole way. We were people who looked and knew our God as our Father, who disciplines us as a father disciplines his son. What if we were people who really had this part of Moses' sermon laid into our hearts? If we understood the proven character of God and nothing could shake us out of that proper relationship with the Father. So I'll give you 5 things that I think will happen. 5 things. This is not really coming out of the text. It's mostly coming out of my brain, but nevertheless, I think they're true. First, we would have peace beyond measure. There would not be a circumstance, not one, that would shake us out of peace. Why? Because we'd be full of trust. We'd have the whole story in our minds and in our hearts. We would have peace beyond measure. Second, I think we would have worship beyond degree. The kind of worship that fills the heart as it flows out of the heart. The kind of worship that we need. The kind of worship that when you're around it, you need more of it. I want to do that again. I want to worship in that way again. If we could truly remember the whole story and be totally cemented in our relationship with God, our worship would be mind-blowing. 3, the power of sin in our lives would be shattered. Temptation would not have its hold on us. You know, interesting, when Jesus was tempted by the devil, as he was fasting in the wilderness, and Jesus says, if you really are the Son of God, if that's who you are, you're hungry, command these stones be turned into bread. Jesus had this sermon in his heart. He said, no, man will not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. He just shattered the power of sin. Like with a big steel breaker bar into a clay pot. Boom. The temptation went away. 4, we would find an abundant life even in a time of famine and perishing. Even when we don't have answers and our hunger is literally killing us, we would find an abundant life. The kind of life that makes a millionaire jealous. Because it never is about stuff. Man can't live by bread alone. But if God's speaking, and we're listening, and we're holding His hand, what more could a human soul need? And lastly, I think if we really had these truths in our heart, we would be able to be profoundly honest about our own failures. We would be the kind of authentic that our world admires. We wouldn't need to put on a show. Because never been about me. Sit down a second, let me tell you my story, right? I'm going to tell you the whole story. It's never been about me doing awesome. It's always been about God providing and disciplining and caring for me. This is only something that the work of the Spirit can do in our hearts. Because the human nature is to be myopic, to see only what's right around us. We have to have God's perspective. We have to be interested in God's perspective. We have to ask for it. We have to wrestle for it. We have to really want it. I hope that this morning you have some sort of desire in your heart to want God's perspective on your life, to be able to recount your own wilderness journey and every hard and horrible thing the Lord has walked you through, every failure that He's disciplined you for, and every way in which He has come through to do you good in the end. Let's pray. Father in heaven, you are great, and we need you to speak, Lord. I ask that you would open up our hearts, that you would open up our minds, that you would show us what our whole way has been. That you would remind us of the manna and the hunger, of the thirst and the water out of the flinty rock. God, I pray that you would show us all of the incredible provision that we have been totally unaware of, where our feet did not swell and our clothing did not wear out. I pray that you would cause us to be a people of profound thanks and joy and worship because we are with you. God, I pray that you would use it to transform us. God, I do pray that you would meet those who are in a place of material need, that you would do as you have promised, to confirm your covenant and to provide for us. God, we pray that as you provide for us, it would cause us to be more faithful and not less. That we would be able to remember and to do your word on all occasions. We bless you, Lord, and we bless your name. And we pray this in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.